The college wrestling world is on fire this week after so many crazy upsets. It's one of the craziest weekends that I've ever seen, and I'm going to be talking all about that, as well as the situation with Gavin Teasdale, Austin DeSanto, and a couple of the other Iowa guys in the lightweights. We're going to be talking about the Iowa versus Iowa State dual preview, which teams that may go undefeated this season, as well as there's a little special treat at the end of the show for LSU fans. So without further ado, let's stop stalling and start talking wrestling. What's going on, wrestling fans? My name's Josiah, and welcome to the Fanco Wrestling Show, the #1 wrestling podcast on YouTube. And if you are interested and you're a big Fanco Wrestling fan, one great way to support the channel is by checking out the Fanco Wrestling merchandise. I have my Fanco Wrestling shirt on right here. It's a very comfortable tee. Just added a bunch of new things to the store. Make sure to check that out in the description below. And I want to let you know that if you do purchase something and send me a little picture on Instagram of you in that gear, I'm going to make sure to repost that so you can be looking fly in front of all your friends, whether it's at practice, whether it's at a competition, wherever you are. Make sure that you check that out. So let's dive into this crazy weekend of wrestling, talking about some things in the world of wrestling first of all. And the first thing talking about in the world of wrestling is the Bill Ferrell. The Bill Ferrell is one of the first competitions on the way, so wrestlers can qualify for the Olympic team trials in April. Bill Ferrell, we saw some great results, and I don't want to necessarily get into a full-on discussion of the tournament. I just want to point out a couple of things as they relate to the college wrestling world. Now, one of the first things that I saw that really intrigued me was Seth Gross's performance. Seth Gross looked phenomenal at this tournament. Not only did he beat Nato in the finals, who Nato was a powerhouse, just a couple of years ago in college wrestling, and Seth Gross took it to him, as well as beating Darian Cruz, another powerhouse in the college wrestling world, or was in the college wrestling world. A couple other guys, looking at the bracket with Imar. Imar, of course, won his bracket over Jason Nolf, who beat his teammate, or former teammate, Vincenzo Joseph. And we saw Vincenzo Joseph avenge his loss to Mekhi Lewis. Now, of course, Mekhi Lewis is taking that Olympic redshirt year this year and is not competing in college, so we won't see them wrestle folk style, but it was an interesting freestyle match. And then the last thing I want to mention about this is Gable Steveson winning it all. Of course, right now he's not wrestling for Minnesota because of a suspension. I don't know when we're going to see him out. Hopefully sometime soon, because that kind of leads into the next topic, which is one of the big upsets of the week, was, of course, Ryder beating Minnesota. Did you watch this match? Was anybody expecting Ryder to beat Minnesota? I know that I absolutely was not expecting this, and it was, of course, no help to the fact that Gable Steveson is out on suspension. But that's what's going on there. The other interesting match of the weekend, of course, Stanford took over North Carolina. They beat them in a duel, number 17 ranked North Carolina. Michigan State beat Oklahoma. Illinois over Mizzou. Mizzou taking a couple of unexpected early season losses. Of course, they also lost to Virginia Tech, but Virginia Tech seems to be a powerhouse this year. Also taking out not only Mizzou, not only Northwestern, but this week taking over Ohio State. Virginia Tech beat Ohio State. I thought that was what a crazy match that was. What was your favorite match of that duel? Of course, we saw Sammy Sasso get stunned by Brent Moore. And if you watch this match, you can see Sasso was going in on a shot attempt. I don't know if he was necessarily going for a fine ridge carry, for a high crotch, or some sort of duck under. I couldn't really tell what he was going for there, but Moore kind of caught him and just stuck him. And I was not expecting Sasso to get stuck like this. But hey, listen, it's an early season loss for a freshman, redshirt freshman, and that's to be expected in the college wrestling world. And that's exactly what happened. And then, of course, David McFadden losing was also a big upset of the weekend. And the final upset of the weekend was Lehigh defeating Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, the number 4 team in the country. Now, in this show, I'm going to be going into exactly why I think all these upsets are happening, what's going on this year, why is college wrestling such a madhouse this season, what is exactly going on. I'll be discussing that a little bit later on. The big topic of discussion here, of course, with the Oklahoma State duel is there were a lot of fans mad at the 33-pounder in Reese Whitcraft, the freshman, who missed a skin check, kind of missed. There's something going on with his skin, and they ended up having to forfeit that weight, which ultimately cost them the match. Now, of course, it wasn't just Whitcraft's fault. You saw Nick Piccinini on Twitter coming to his defense, just saying that, listen, guys, it's not his fault that we lost the duel. There were multiple factors in effect here. It wasn't just his fault, and I totally agree with him. You know, there are many things that go into effect. Now, what the situation was, I don't know. All that Oklahoma State can do here is come back and look for a victory. I was really just surprised here that there wasn't a backup at 133. Of course, we know that Fix is out on the Olympic redshirt year. Cade Brock is injured. There are a couple other guys, some freshmen, a couple backups. I guess I don't know if they weren't there, what was going on there, but that's what's going on there. In the last topic in the world of wrestling is that Bo Nickel getting into MMA. This is a topic that's been going around for a while now. We kind of knew that Bo Nickel wanted to get into MMA after wrestling. Right now, he's looking to actually open his own gym in State College to practice MMA there. He's partnering now with American Top Team, and he'll be opening that gym sometime next year after the Olympic team trials, after the Olympics, if he makes that team. And he's already had his first event now. He'll be fighting in the third coach grappling event against Gordon Ryan on December 7th. Will you guys be checking that out? That'll be an interesting thing to see how Bo Nickel does in his first MMA-related event. Now, let's move on to the first topic of the day. What on earth is going on with the Iowa Hawkeyes in their lightweights? Of course, we know that their lightest weight in Spencer Lee, he's got that weight unlocked. But what's going on from 33 to 41? That's the real question. People have been asking this for such a long time as to what's going on with Teasdale, what's going on with Austin DeSanto, Max Murin, and Paul Glynn. What's going on? Let's talk about exactly the situation going on with the Hawkeyes. So the first thing that I want to mention is the wrestle-offs. This really all started with a wrestle-off. Well, I guess if you want to go back further, started off when Teasdale decommitted from Penn State or he was already there, ended up going to Iowa. That's where he was. Found that decision out a couple of months ago. And then everybody started wondering what's going to happen with the Hawkeyes. Well, we're still not totally aware, but I have a couple guesses at what could happen. So, started with the wrestle-offs. The wrestle-offs, Austin DeSanto ended up wrestling off at 133 pounds against Aaron Meyer. Now, we have seen Austin DeSanto bump up a weight already in his first match of the season to 141 pounds. Is he going to stay there or not? Now, he beat Aaron Meyer by a major decision, but he did not wrestle off against Gavin Teasdale. Teasdale wrestled off against Glenn, beating him 3-2 just with a decision. Now, the other interesting fact is that Max Murin, he actually didn't even wrestle off. Now, we could have found out why that reason was, why he didn't wrestle off this past weekend. Whenever Murin he wrestled his first tournament of the season at the Luther Open. He won his first match by fall. Then he had a medical forfeit out of the match. So what's the deal with that? Is he injured? It seems like something may be going on with Murin. That's why he's injured. So now we can see what's going on. We also this past weekend, saw that Gavin Teasdale lost to a Division III wrestler in Christian Rumpf of Wartburg. This kind of stunned a lot of people. I saw a lot of people messaging me, people talking to me about this match, which was very interesting that this happened. Now, Rumpf isn't necessarily anybody to be scoffed at. Wartburg is a very tough Division III school, but that's what happened there. And then, listen, he had a couple other matches that he did win by tech fall, so there's nothing going on there. And as I mentioned, with DeSanto, first match of the year, bumping up to 41. But Glenn, in the first duel of the year against Chattanooga, was the guy who actually wrestled at 133. So you see what's happening here is probably the brand looking at who's the best guy for these weights. Now, what is the projected lineup? What do I think is most likely to happen? Well, Of course, Spencer Lee at 25. That's nothing. That's there. Pat Lugo, we'll end him off at 49. I'm not going to go through the rest of the lineup, just kind of these lightweights. Pat Lugo at 49. We've seen where maybe one of these guys could bump up, maybe a Murin or a Teasdale all the way up to 49. I highly doubt that. But at 33, I think we're still going to see DeSanto wrestle at 33. He's the number 2 ranked guy at the weight, which is saying a lot. I mean, he's a great wrestler, and I'm interested to see how he's going to do at that weight. But I think he just bumped up a weight, whether it's part of his descent plan or whatever it is. I think we're going to see him at 33. So who are you going to see then at 41? Well, as of right now, it seems that Murin's injured. I think we're going to end up seeing Teasdale wrestle at 41. And the only reason I'm not saying Glenn there is because Teasdale beat him in that wrestle-off. We could see a couple other things happen. Anything can happen with the Hawkeyes. But that's exactly what's going on with this crazy situation with the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, let's talk about the next topic of the day. Let's discuss the Iowa versus Iowa State duel preview. These two teams will be facing off this weekend on November 24th. At Iowa State. Now, Iowa, of course, is the number 2 ranked team in the nation right now, while Iowa State is number 11. Now, I thought this was Iowa versus Iowa State's always an exciting duel, but I think what's going to make this so exciting is once you start hearing and start seeing a couple of these matchups, can Iowa State pull off a victory here? I'm going to discuss how the Cyclones can win. But first, I'm going to go through the lineups and discuss a couple of these previews. So, at 125 pounds, of course, Iowa has Spencer Lee. He'll be facing off against Alex Mackel. Mackel, of course, these two have wrestled in the past where Spencer Lee did major him. Not this season because they haven't faced off this season yet. But Mackel this year has already won the Cyclone Open. He's number 7 ranked in the country. And, of course, Spencer Lee's ranked number 1. So that's a great way to get this match started off, and you're going to see a lot of ranked matches here with these two great teams. Now, at 133 pounds, this is, again, the situation. Is it Teasdale? Is it DeSanto? Is it Glenn? Who's going to be here? Who are we going to see for the Hawkeyes? I think this is going to be very telling for the rest of the season as far as who is going to be at the 133 starter. I think it's going to be DeSanto. Now, if it is DeSanto, we're going to see him face off against Austin Gomez. Now, of course, DeSanto and Gomez, these two Austins have some... they've wrestled each other in the past. Where we've seen Gomez beat DeSanto in the past, but last year at Nationals, we did see DeSanto avenge that loss and ended up majoring him at the national final. So it's a win-loss thing. Now, Gomez didn't wrestle this in the first duel of the season. There was actually Todd Small who wrestled against Bucknell for Iowa State. So we'll see exactly who wrestles there. But that's the match of 133. At 141, we'll see probably Murin or Teasdale here. Murin wrestled his first match of the season, but not in the first duel. His first match of the season, he actually ended up... He won, but then he medical forfeited out of the Luther Open, out of that tournament. So he appears to be injured right now, but he is the number 9 ranked guy at 141 pounds. But the number 13 ranked guy in the country right now from Iowa State is Ian Parker, the junior, who actually beat Murin last year in the duel by a decision. So if these two wrestle again, this is a very great match where we could see, if Iowa State can pick up a couple of these wins here and beat a couple of the guys who are ranked ahead of him, if Gomez can pick up a win and Parkin can pick up a win, that's going to start shifting the tide for the Cyclones, keep that momentum going. So at 149 pounds, this is another great matchup. We have a number 6 versus number 4, and Pat Lugo versus Jarrett Deegan. Deegan, he has 2 wins over Lugo last season, and that by a tiebreaker that went into overtime as well as just a regular decision. So we could see this as another great match. In the Cyclones, Iowa State could be picking up another win here, depending on where we see him versus Pat Lugo. So I already told you guys, this is going to be an exciting duel. Please let me know if you're as excited to watch this duel as I am. Will you be tuning in this weekend? So at 157 pounds, this is where For me, it's a very exciting match because we get to see David Carr against his first really ranked opponent. He's number 19 from Iowa State. The freshman coming in. He had a strong redshirt season last year, but how is he going to do now wrestling against some real competition now against number 2 in Caleb Young? Caleb Young, number 2 guy in the country for the Hawkeyes. That's going to be a very interesting and telling. It's going to be a very telling match for David Carr. If he picks up a win there, that'll be nice. But Caleb Young is very he's a solid wrestler. So at 165, we're going to see, this is one of Hawkeye's toughest guys in Alex Marinelli, another number 2 ranked guy in the country. Arguably could be ranked number 1. Of course, Vincenzo Joseph there at number 1 at 165. But he's going to be up against Chase Straw. Chase Straw is starting out with a good season, won the Cyclone Open, but it's going to be a tough match for him. Another match that's going to be tough for Iowa State is at 174, where Marcus Coleman is going to be facing off against Michael Kemmer. Michael Kemmer moving up a couple of weight classes this season to 174 pounds. These two do actually have a common opponent, and we see that Kemmer actually wrestled JoJo Smith in the past, and he has a win over him, but Marcus Coleman actually has a loss to him. So that's just a little bit of what's going on there. Now, at 184 pounds, what's going on at 184 pounds? You have Cash Wilkie or Nelson Brains. We saw Nelson Brains already go out for the Hawkeyes at 184 pounds and pick up a solid victory. And, of course, Brains, Terry Brand's son, Uncle Tom, head coach. We'll see exactly what happens there whenever he wrestles Sam Colbray. Colbray had a win in the duel last year. He actually won last year against Wilkie. Had just a decision. Now, what are we going to see happen here? I don't know. If Nelson Brands does end up wrestling and picking off Sam, that could be another big win for the Hawkeyes and really move them up in the rankings and show that maybe the Hawkeyes deserve to be that top number 1 team. But let's not digress, because at 197 we have Jacob Warner for the Hawkeyes going up against Joel Shapiro. Joel Shapiro already has a few solid wins this season. Of course, we know Jacob Warner of the Hawkeyes is he's a great wrestler. Now, these two do not have any common opponents right now, so we'll see exactly what happens. I expect Warner to get that win there, but that's just my opinion. And at 285, now before I go into this, I will be talking about how I think the Cyclones can win and what I think the match scores might be. Now, for the Hawkeyes, you have Anthony Cassiope, who won by fall last season in the duel against Gannon Gremmel. Gremmel Gannon, one of the coolest names in wrestling, Gremmel Gannon. He won the Cyclone Open this year, and he actually has a loss in his first duel by disqualification, which I don't, by a DQ. But Cassiope already won by fall this season. Great fall to open up this season. So you see already, these lineups are going to be interesting, and I'm going to pull them up right here. So these are the lineups. Now, what is Iowa State going to have to do to beat Iowa? And you talk about I phrase it that way just because, listen, Iowa State's the underdog. Iowa State's the guy that has to beat Iowa, okay? Now, how I have the score right now in my mind is 26-9 for the Hawkeyes. Now, that's if everything goes the Hawkeyes' way. That's if everything goes how I think it's going to go. But what can an Iowa State do? And nothing ever goes 100% right, quote unquote. So what's going to happen? Well, Iowa State needs a couple guys to step up. First of all, they need Straw, Coleman. They need Shapiro from that 65 to 74 range. That's where the Iowa State really needs their guys to not only step up, but really hold their ground. Of course, they're always looking for a win, but they can't be getting majored or pinned or tacked. They can't be doing that, and there's no room for that in a duel like this. And if that happens, as well as if Iowa State can pull off a couple of upsets, if they can pull off an upset with Gomez over DeSanto, if they can pull off an upset with Parker over Murin, maybe even a David Carr over Caleb Young, if they can pull off just a couple of these upsets, I think that's enough to shift the tide in their favor. And even at heavyweight, look, it's only a Gannon against Cassiope. Very possible that there's an upset there, and we could see something happen. And if those things that I just said come true, then we can see a 15-15 score, and then it's going to come down to criteria. So that's what I think is going to happen. Please let me know in the comments below, who do you think is going to win this duel? Are the Hawkeyes, do they have it in the bag, or does Iowa State have a chance? Please let me know what you think. And as I've already mentioned, listen, this season has been crazy. This has been one of the most exciting, one of the craziest season starts that I have seen, at least in my time on this earth, okay? So I'm going to talk about four things that we've learned from this season this far in only 3 weeks of the 2019-2020 wrestling season. So, first of all, I want to discuss what is causing all of this havoc, all of these crazy upsets. And of course, if you missed the past week, if you missed the past couple weeks of wrestling, listen, it's been nuts. Virginia Tech has already beat Missouri, Northwestern, and Ohio State. Oklahoma State has already gone down to Lehigh. We've already seen Oklahoma lose. We've seen Stanford win over a North Carolina. Really, that I don't even want to say the bottom 15 to 25 teams are changing, because the top teams are changing too. We don't know what's going to happen. So what's causing this mess? First of all, it could just be confused rankings. I mean, the biggest concern, the biggest thing that's happening here is that the Olympic red shirt, it's an Olympic year. The Olympic red shirts are out, and you don't know, nobody knows what to expect. Nobody knows where to rank guys, because there are a lot of guys who are in the rankings who haven't wrestled those top ranked guys, haven't wrestled guys who are in 1 through 5. And a lot of guys, I mean, let's just call it how it is. If you have a singlet that says Oklahoma State, Penn State, Iowa, you're going to get that higher ranking. That's all there is to it. That's how it is. Because you have that singlet on, you're going to get that higher ranking. And it's not until a team like Virginia Tech comes kind of out of nowhere and knocks you off that's where we start seeing those rankings change. So that's one reason that I think is very big in causing this mess. But the other thing is that kind of a comment. I've been talking to some people talking about less emphasis on duels from certain teams. We've seen where there's just not as much emphasis on the dual season. We see a forfeit in a match, or if somebody's hurt, they're just not going to wrestle. Coaches are going to put them through that. They'll get their RPI up, they'll get their matches up when they can, but during the duels, it's not going to happen. So you see a couple more forfeits. So that's kind of what's causing this mess. But let's talk about the 4 things that we've learned from the season so far. The first thing is, yeah, Olympic red shirts are affecting this season like crazy. It's been upset city up in here. One of the biggest matches, of course, has been Luke Pletcher moving up and taking out Dom Demas, and that's one of the biggest upsets to start out the season. But we've also seen Brent Moore pinning Sammy Sasso. Sasso went in on a shot attempt. I don't know if it was like a high crotch or some sort of duck under, whatever he was doing. Went down low, and he kind of got caught. Brent Moore came in on him, and he stuck him. And credit to Moore where it's due. We also saw Ethan Smith of Ohio State take out David McFadden. David McFadden was number 4 in the country. Ethan Smith kind of came out of nowhere and took his reins. We've seen Kyle Connell go down already. Had a very high ranking. Weren't sure how he was going to perform this season. Still has it's early on. We just, what's going to happen. And then we also had Nelson Brands coming in and making some noise in his first duel of the season as a Hawkeye. So listen, those are just a couple things that are affecting with this crazy redshirt year. You don't know what's going on there. And kind of going along with that is the number 2 thing we've learned from this season is that the 141 field is up for grabs. Now listen, I think that there are pretty much every ways up for grabs. I think that maybe there are a couple ways that they're pretty locked. However, 141 I think it's up for grabs where anybody in that weight class can get it. And I think there are a few weight classes like this, but I'm structuring it like this because 141 we've already seen Luke Pletcher moving up from 33 to 41 and knocking off the number 1 ranked wrestler from Oklahoma, Dom Demas. And what an exciting match! What an exciting match that was. But the other thing with Pletcher is that he just had a very close match with Real Woods of Stanford. Now, this wasn't necessarily an exciting match, and Pletcher likes to keep it close a lot of the times, but with Real Woods, we saw this match go into overtime, and that's where things just went off the rail, went crazy. Woods going on that shot attempt, Pletcher just able to end up defending that and come around with the takedown, but it showed that Woods is a real opponent to go up against. The other guys in this field who we've seen wrestling well so far are Tariq Wilson. He's already beat Sedarian Perry in the dual meet of the season. Cole Matthews of Pitt came out strong at the beginning of the year with a win. His only loss of the season so far, I believe, is to Luke Pletcher, the number one ranked kid. Now, he was majored by him, but you can see guys close that gap all the time, so you never know what's going to happen there. Also, you got Mitch McKee, you got Grant Leith, Max Murin, if he's not injured, Nick Lee starting off the season with a pin. I mean, this weight is loaded, and I think that anything can happen. The number 3 thing we've learned from this season, and listen, this goes back to the upsets. The team race is still fluctuating. Penn State isn't up here anymore. And really, I don't know if they have been necessarily up here compared to other teams over the past couple of years. But Iowa's right there. We've seen Oklahoma State go down already, losing to Lehigh. Lehigh becoming a prominent figure in this race, as well as Virginia Tech taking out not one. It wasn't just a fluke. Not one ranked opponent, not 2, but 3 ranked opponents, including the number 3 team in the country in Ohio State, as well as Missouri and Northwestern, showing that they have a lot of guys out here, and that is without Mekhi Lewis. I mean, without him, and that's just insane stuff going on right there. But that's what's going on with the team race. But the 4th thing that we've learned from this year, and please let me know, what have you learned from this season so far? What are you interested in as far as everything that's going on? The number 4 thing that we've learned from this season is that, as far as I'm concerned, heavyweight may be one of the most exciting weights to watch this year. And listen, personally, I'm not always a huge fan of heavyweights. That's just depending on who you're watching, it's not always as exciting. It's just a different style of wrestling than lightweights. That's all there is to it. Not all the times, but sometimes, okay? But this year, okay, the past couple years, we've had some awesome guys to watch, and I love watching them wrestle. Tate Orndorff has already knocked off Tanner Hall of Arizona State and Jordan Wood of Lehigh, moving up massively in the rankings to where he deserves to be. Of course, Anthony Cassari is still on top of this weight, and then Gable Steveson is up there. We're not sure exactly what's going on with him right now, considering he is suspended, but he did just win the Bill Ferrell and shown that he's still training, and he still wants that national title. We'll see when he gets in there. We also see Mason Paris becoming a prominent figure in this race. Of course, he's already defeated Matt Stencil of Central Michigan at the Michigan State Open. Stencil is actually, what's one interesting fact is he is one of the guys who's leading the country right now in pins. And I think it's very interesting because we've seen this happen in the past couple of years where heavyweights have led the nation at the beginning of the year in pins. And he's not number 1. He's actually tied for number 1, but that's Stencil. We also saw Demetrius Thomas, he's already defeated Jerry Hino in a tight duel, but those two are very exciting guys to watch, and I think we're going to see a clash there again later on in the season, as well as Trent Hilger. Now, Hilger hasn't necessarily faced any tough ranked opponents yet, but he's still undefeated, still a solid wrestler to watch, and those are the 4 things that we've learned from this season, and what do you think are you expecting from the rest of the season? Now, this is what's going to be... I'm so excited to talk about this next topic. Excuse me, talking this long. I got to get some water. So, now, let's discuss which teams could go undefeated through the 2020 season. This is an interesting topic to discuss right now because of all of these crazy upsets, okay? So which teams could we see go undefeated this season? Well, I'm going to pull up a graphic here, which teams are undefeated right now in the top 10, and which teams we could see go undefeated, as well as who I think is going to end up undefeated at the end of the year, which teams are going to be undefeated. So, These are the teams right now that are undefeated. You got Penn State at the top, Iowa, Nebraska, Virginia Tech, Wisconsin, Lehigh, NC State, and Arizona State. So there are 8 teams that could go undefeated, that are undefeated right now, all in the top 10. Right outside of there is actually Iowa State. Now, Iowa State has a tough duel coming up, but now, I'm going to discuss the wins these teams have in the season so far, as well as their upcoming duels that they have going on. First up is Penn State. Now, Penn State has already a win against Navy, 1-0. Upcoming, they're going to be facing off against Arizona State on November 22nd, as well as Lehigh, and then probably their biggest duel of the year, which is going to be a massive game changer, is the Iowa duel on January 31st, and that's really going to prove whether they are that top-tier contending team. Now, of course, Iowa, another team that could go undefeated. They already have a win against Chattanooga. Their next test probably isn't going to be until Nebraska. Nebraska, that number 3 ranked team in the country right now in the rankings. But then, like I said, Penn State, they're going to have Wisconsin and Ohio State. And you see, I mean, of course, a lot of these teams are in Big Ten, and not all of them can go undefeated. So, at number 3, Nebraska, their next big duel they're going to have to win is going to be up against Wisconsin. Wisconsin, of course, is right there in the rankings. Then they have Iowa, Penn State, and Ohio State in February. Are they going to be able to pull that off? What do you think? Before we go any further, please let me know which teams you think are going to go undefeated by the end of the year. And one of the biggest storylines, of course, on the season so far has been Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech ranked number 4 in the country, tied with Wisconsin as 3-0 with 3 wins over ranked opponents. Missouri, Northwestern, and Ohio State have proven to be a real threat. And they are a team who I think has a very, very strong shot at going undefeated throughout this entire season. Their next biggest duel, their biggest opponent is probably going to be up against North Carolina in January, then NC State. And I'll get to NC State in just a minute. And then they also will be facing up against Pitt, because all of those teams are some tough ACC opponents. And the ACC is just, it's an exciting conference this year, to say the least. And number 4 tied also is Wisconsin. Wisconsin 5-0 already, have the most wins out of all of these teams. Now, didn't necessarily go up against all of that many ranked teams, but they did beat Fresno, Army, and Navy, just to name a couple of schools. Their biggest duel of the season coming up January 1st against Iowa. We'll see what kind of team Wisconsin is then. And then they're going to have to go up against a couple of these other teams: Nebraska, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. They'll be facing all of them this season. Then Lehigh. Lehigh has already knocked off Oklahoma State, the number 4 ranked team in the country. Now they will be facing Pitt, Penn State, and Arizona State. If they could knock off Penn State as they're the number 1 team in the country, I will be very, very impressed. But they've already knocked off Oklahoma State in what was a very close duel. It came down to the wire. Now, at number 9 in the country right now is NC State. NC State is 4-0 with win over Old Dominion, a couple of I don't know if they're D2, D3 schools, but that's NC State. And they will be wrestling Cornell, Princeton, Virginia, as well as Pitt, UNC, and Virginia Tech. And then Arizona State, who's 4-0, has already knocked off Purdue and Virginia. They will be wrestling Penn State this upcoming weekend, as well as Ohio State, Iowa State, Stanford, Missouri, as well as Lehigh. So which team has the best chance of going out undefeated on the season out of all of these schools? Now, I think one of the things that's probably the most interesting to discuss here is, what are the odds that any of these teams can go undefeated? Because listen, they can't all go undefeated. That's just a fact. That is just a fact that they cannot all go undefeated, because they're all wrestling each other at some point. There are 2 teams, I believe. 2 or 3 are the max number of teams that can go undefeated. But here are a couple of the storylines here. If Arizona State can defeat Penn State, I think that they have a shot at going undefeated, because they have some tough competition, but not as tough as some of these other opponents, where I think that if they can beat Penn State, then they're a real threat. Now, next up is Penn State or Iowa. It's going to be either Penn State that goes undefeated or Iowa. I mean, you can also see Ohio Ohio State already lost, so they can't actually. Penn State or Iowa. This will be decided on January 31st. I think both of these teams have a shot at being undefeated by the time they face off, which just makes it more exciting. You see it maybe an outside shot at Nebraska, Lehigh, or Wisconsin. If one of those teams knocks Iowa or Penn State off early on, well, then you don't have that storyline. But I think that that's going to be the storyline in January, and then a very similar storyline is going to be Virginia Tech, versus NC State. NC State could be 13-0, and Virginia Tech could be 12-0 by the time that if they both win out to that point, they could be both undefeated going into their February 14th duel, which could lead up into being one of the last best duels of the entire season, and I'm excited to see. So what are the Fanco odds that these teams go undefeated? Well, I'm kind of putting these on odds as far as which their schedule, who they go up against, all that. So NC State, I think right now has the best chance of going undefeated, mostly just because they don't face off against as many tough opponents as these other teams. So if they end up beating Virginia Tech, if they go undefeated up until that point, beat Virginia Tech, they knock off Pitt, UNC, and then beat VT, they're going to go out undefeated on the season, and I think that's why they have the best chance over, let's say, a Penn State, who has a couple of tough opponents in their way. They're going to have a tough duel against Ohio State. They're going to have a tough duel against Ohio, as well as Lehigh, as well as, that's just how their schedule is. But they've pulled it off in the past. That's why I have them slightly above Iowa. Very similar to Virginia Tech. I'm hoping Virginia Tech is not just an early season momentum. I hope they keep that momentum building, keep it going, and we could see them going. But that's why I had them just a little bit below some of these other schools. And then we go kind of down a little bit, mostly just because these teams face tough teams early on. If they lose that, they can't go undefeated, obviously. So you have Lehigh at 30%, Arizona State at 20%, Wisconsin and Nebraska, just because these schools, they have so many chances of losing to a couple of these other teams. Of course, they have chances of winning too, but that's as far as the Fanco odds. So please tell me, am I crazy? And what do you think as far as these odds go? Now, this is a very exciting topic that I want to finish off the show on. Did you know that Louisiana State University used to have a wrestling team? Now, of course, if you were around watching wrestling or you were a wrestler in the 70s, 80s, you probably knew that LSU had a wrestling team, as well as many other SEC schools. But if you're a young guy like me, maybe you didn't know that. So I'm going to tell you all about Louisiana State University's best wrestler. I thought this was a very interesting topic right now, mostly because LSU is doing so well in football. So let's talk about how their wrestling team used to be. Now, one of their best reigns as a team, if you want to call it a reign, was under Larry Shakatano. Shakatano won 7 conference titles as under LSU, SEC titles, and 2 8th-place finishes at the national tournament. Now, that's pretty crazy to think about now that an SEC team can actually have that high of a finish at nationals, can have that many conference titles. But they do, I believe, have the most conference titles out of anybody in the SEC. Whenever Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, those schools had actual wrestling teams. He had a couple of All-Americans on his team with Claire Richardson, who took 4th place, Mike Clevenger, 3rd place, as well as this best wrestler from LSU in Kevin Jackson, who is a 4-time All-American, with the catchphrase, "Be in it to win it." Now, of course, as always, there are links to these stories in the description below if you're interested in reading up more on that. But I'm going to tell you about some of these interesting things. So now, Kevin Jackson was actually just recently inducted into the LSU Athletics Hall of Fame. He's in a couple of other Athletics Hall of Fame, such as the National Wrestling Hall of Fame, which he deserves to be. But it's interesting that he is from LSU. So what's interesting about him is that he was actually only at LSU for 3 years. Why was he only there for 3 years? Well, that's because the school cut the program. Is that big of a surprise? No, because it's a football school, and the SEC a lot of times is in it for the money. And if other sports aren't making the money, they're going to cut him. So, but that's another topic for another time. Now, where did he go his senior year? He actually went to Iowa State, where he ended up coaching later on in his career. He actually ended up getting that coaching career after Kel Sanderson left Iowa State. Kevin Jackson moved in, coached from 2009 to 2017 at Iowa State. Now, LSU, as I mentioned already, was the second to last team to drop their program in 1985. But before that time, there were 36 national qualifiers over 11 years, from 70 to 81, I believe it was, sometime around there. This is just facts from an article that I have linked in the description below. But as far as Kevin Jackson, four-time All-American, a runner-up in 1987, he would have been the SEC's only national champion. I'm kind of upset that he didn't win, just because that would have been cool to be SEC's only national champion in history. But he was a runner-up at 167 pounds with a 33-1 senior year record. He was a high school state champ actually in Michigan. Now, as far as the international level, and this is where I think that Kevin Jackson really, really succeeds. He is a gold medalist at the Olympics. He actually won the games in Barcelona. And it's another interesting fact about him is he is the second ever black wrestler to win an Olympic gold medal in wrestling, which is very interesting. So he is a two-time world champ, a two-time Pan Am's champ. And this, like I said, he's one of the best international wrestlers that America has seen. He's one of only just a couple of guys to claim 3 world-level titles. Now, he has been retired from competition since 2001, but he does still help out at the Olympic Training Center. He has fought in the UFC, actually, back in the late 90s, 2000s, kind of back when UFC was really building up. He's fought in 6 fights until he ended up retiring from that. And then like I said, he's training at the Olympic Training Center. And now one thing that I want to discuss is kind of neat is that Coach Zadok calls him one of the greatest wrestlers our nation has ever produced. And I want to say that it's just a shame that LSU now has no wrestling program, and we're probably never going to see another wrestler from LSU as good as Kevin Jackson. I wish that wasn't the case, but unfortunately that's how the events are nowadays. And hopefully the football team keeps doing well, but that's just what we have to talk about nowadays. Now, guys, that's going to do it for this week's show. If you were a fan of this week's show, please make sure to leave a comment down below or just hit like and support the channel. It really helps me out into knowing how to improve the show and how to get better so that we can keep on pushing this great wrestling content out to you guys. I really enjoy talking to you in the comments below. It's a real great time. And listen, it was a very exciting week of wrestling. It was one of my favorite weeks of wrestling that I have seen. Just a very exciting weekend overall. And guys, that's going to do it for this week's Fanco Wrestling Show. So until next time, we'll see you then.